What up, my freaks? RuinousInsight here with something that's a little bit experimental for this channel. Now, I'm sure there's similar guides that exist out there, but I'd figured I'd put one together too now that the patch has come out and updated the Chaos Fleet. So I've had a few conversations with people in the comments during my Chaos Let's Play about the various ships in the Chaos Fleet, and I thought I'd kind of consolidate all my thoughts on them into a couple of short, bite-sized videos. I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet as I think it'll be easier to digest. Now, the Chaos faction does tend to require a bit more finesse than some of the others, in my opinion, but it is also very enjoyable and rewarding when you get it right. So this series is going to be my quick and dirty guide to Chaos, just the way Slanesh likes it. Well, maybe not the quick part, but wait, that is a half-truth, so I suppose Tzeentch should also be happy, and we've therefore appeased 2 of the 4 Chaos powers already. I think we're well underway. So, if you do want to see more content of this kind around these parts, make sure to let me know by leaving a like and a comment to support the content. It don't gotta be nothing fancy, the algorithm god takes what it can get. Now, first quick disclaimer, I'm not the grand authority on the subject. I played mostly Chaos in the multiplayer in both this and the first game, so I do feel like I know the fleet fairly well, but I'm sure people will have different opinions, so feel free to leave your 2 or 200 cents, point out any errors I make. I do enjoy discussion, and insight into the Ruinous powers will always be appreciated on this channel. So, the format of this thing is going to be this handy-dandy little fleet creation screen right here, and I'm simply going to go through each ship and class or tonnage or category, whatever you want to call it, of ship, and quickly discuss its strengths, weaknesses, and what type of fleet it's most suited for. Of course, in addition to that, I'll offer some opinions on what I personally think are good ships and either not so good or situational ships in the Chaos roster. Looking at you, Executor. So yeah, maybe I'll throw in an advanced fleet guide after I'm done with all this for some fleet compositions and like upgrade skills, favors of the gods, and the whole rock, paper, scissors thing that this game has going in its multiplayer, and to a lesser degree the single player as well. All that, of course, pending interest. So consider this first video just a few basic general points. Now, if you're not interested in the theory aspects and just want to get poor blood and skull-starved Khorne his due as fast as possible, I'll be happy to oblige you with a few very efficient suggestions right off the bat. Let's say 4, 1 for each of the Chaos gods that definitely exist, and I guess a couple more for the one that doesn't. Without further ado, in my opinion, you cannot go wrong fielding the Carnage Cruiser, Acheron, or Styx battle cruisers, or Repulsive Grand Cruiser. Use those 4 ships in your fleets and you will come out ahead most of the time. Now, in addition to that, Chaos is pretty lucky in that both its light cruiser options and its battleship options are always great choices. They're all fine ships and they will always remain competitive. Now, if you want to hear my opinion on why I picked those 4 ships or the rest of these, well, you'll just have to watch the rest of this series. Ha 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 ha, evil laughter. You've fallen right into my plot. Alright, now the most basic quirk of Chaos, I think everybody knows, is that the ships have high speed and relatively low armor, with 67 all around, of course with the exception of the Emasculator. Now, this means that ships aren't very good at ramming, except again with the exception of the Emasculator, but more importantly, they're also not good at turning into fire. As the Imperials, with their heavily armored prow, they can turn into heavy enemy fire and mitigate more of that damage by having it hit their armored prow. While Chaos is supposed to theoretically be a lance and carrier faction, as there are tons of ships that are either carriers or combat carriers, and more are lances, if anyone is actually familiar with the multiplayer, you will know that some or most of the popular general impact builds that you'd call them, actually run macro fleets. The Carnage and Repulsive spam is really, really common because the macros are quite effective and these 2 are very efficient ships. Now, there are a number of reasons for that, in part because lances are kind of lackluster in terms of damage, and carriers have been nerfed to an insane degree such that they're not nearly as useful as they once were, but I guess I won't get into it now. Especially in the campaign, all of it remains viable, and indeed in the multiplayer as well. Now, when you consider differentiating different Chaos Fleet ships from each other, I think there are a couple of important things to consider that I'm briefly going to mention in this intro video. So the first is the most obvious. It is the range on the weapons. Now, if you haven't figured this out, different weapons have different ranges even though they may be of the same type, i.e., look, these lances on this Executor, you have 9,000 range units and 13,500 range. These are both short and medium range lances as compared to the massively ranged ones on other lance boats. This is a good example because it shows that you can determine that this ship is going to behave fundamentally different from a ship that has really long range lances. Now, the second type of important thing to consider is the mount of, let's go with the Acheron. The type of mount or weapon mount on the ship, specifically turret versus broadside weaponry. This factor is particularly important for Chaos factions, as many of the ships that are best at kiting the enemy, like this Acheron over here, running and gunning, favor the 270-degree turret arcs. This means that a good portion of the DPS off of the turrets is always effectively there, i.e. broadsides have a more difficult orientation to deal with. Their DPS is effectively only at half efficiency if they're only firing in one direction, plus they have to be oriented to actually fire. Turrets, especially the long-range turrets, and especially lance turrets that hit 100% of the time with their accuracy, are essentially firing all the time and outputting consistent DPS. Consistent DPS in a game of attrition over burst can lead to a major difference before close combat is joined. And finally, a third important point, I think, is many of the, well, maybe not many, but a good number of ships have this lance artillery type of weapon. The Murder has it, the Hades has it, the Despoiler has it, and the Idolator and Apostates both have it. And this is a strange little weapon. The Lance Artillery is a type of forward-facing 90-degree kind of deal. Now, the obvious issue with this is that, where is it? Here. Is that you can't fire both the broadsides and the heavy lance artillery at the same ship. So effectively, you can only fire in one or half your, well, maybe not half, or like 2/3 or 1/3 of your weapons at a time, which is kind of an issue unless there are enemy ships that are located on three sides of your ship, in which case, frankly, this ship is going to explode in very, very quickly. This ship is not being very efficient. So, yeah, I personally don't like ships with the lance artillery for this reason, as they require really, really good positioning to make the most of. Now, I'll grant you, it doesn't mean that they're useless. The lance artilleries themselves allow you to chase enemy ships or to still maintain fire while going forward to attack the enemy, especially with their 100% lance accuracy and their relatively high critical chance due to the low time, or the long reload time. Now, that said, I don't think that lances do anything better than turrets would do, because the turrets would be able to fire as the ship is going forward or as it is chasing an enemy, but also be able to turn and fire as they're running away or into the broadsides, effectively keeping their DPS constant as compared to them lance artilleries. Besides, even with the relatively high damage for a lance weapon, that's not all that high compared to something like the big guns on the front of an orc ship. You're probably not going to do much more than kill off a few wounded ships or maybe a few escorts with this weapon. But I suppose that a few escorts is better than a whole lot of nothing. Now, there are some more advanced considerations like raw DPS output and difference between critical chances or crits per minute, however you want to consider that stat, but I think it's gonna be a little bit too deep down the rabbit hole for this intro video. I will mention one more thing and talk briefly about the difference between true carriers and what you might call combat carriers, especially since Chaos is a carrier-heavy fleet. Now, the Styx and the Hellbringer Mark I are what your true carriers are. They are light on weapons, and they are heavy on launch bays. They're meant to stay far away from battle and launch wave after wave of disposable fools at the enemy, not slugging it out with them direct combat-oriented ships. Now, the reason that you don't want to slug it out with these things is because of critical hits to the launch bays. You suffer a critical hit there, and your effective DPS drops massively. Then, alternatively, come the combat carriers like the Retaliator and like the Despoiler. You could argue that the Hecate and the Devastation are also combat carriers, although I think they straddle the line between the Styx and the Hellbringers, so I think they could go both ways, depending on how you look at them. One is shorter range, one is longer range, so maybe 1 and 1 as well. So yeah, the combat carriers. These things are built a little bit differently. They are meant to be able to slug it out and dish damage out up close, but also bring all of the launch bays. Now, this is kind of a weird place to be in. As you probably guessed, these things are kind of a jack-of-all-trade kind of ships. They don't go all out on the ordnance on one hand, so they are probably inferior as aggressive ordnance boats, but they will also get outgunned in close-range brawls. That said, they can fight, but if you take them into combat too soon, then they will suffer crits to their launch bays and become shadows or husks of their former selves and not be able to output the DPS that they should be outputting. It is weird when you have to drag a carrier up close into even mid-range to be of maximum efficiency, and sometimes the game is all about that efficiency. Alright, I think this is enough for a short intro video. In the next video that I'll be putting out momentarily, I'm just going to go on to the ships themselves, starting with a quick rundown of the escort and light cruiser classes together. And before I sign off, I'd like to once again remind you guys that if you want to see this kind of thing around these parts, don't forget to do the stuff. Yeah, you know the stuff. Anyway, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for escorts.